after this. The Hall and Kings Road available.
Which hall?
The hall in your house.
No,
Yes. No, it's 3-4 days for Pesach. I couldn't do it. The question is, guess what boys do is the same stuff. I want to do the whiskey thing.
But you have to speak to the head of catering first.
Sure.
Can't make these decisions without head of catering.
That's you. Is it? After the spread you put on.
After per night.
No, but seriously, I think we should zoom ahead, Rabbi. Rabbi, I think we should zoom ahead.
What?
We should zoom ahead because you're not going to make a sim 2 days before Pesach.
We had a full-on bar in there.
Oh,
Tell me
wow.
now. Tell me
We had punches.
Yeah, and it was COVID safe for our host.
Oh,
Yeah,
good evening.
very
It was very COVID safe.
Alcohol, tell me about
divided,
COVID.
we divided Megillah between us.
Oh, wow.
And then we
Sure, we're just talking about you.
What we
It
did
was very COVID safe.
Oh, quite a lot of people.
Everyone took the food and sat down there.
I know the head off.
After a wonderful performance on Thursday night. So you can't do anything nice.
We're giving them.
Can't help them out because you get lumbered with them.
We're giving Yehuda the job.
Yeah,
He
basically,
did
we
such a
want
good
the
job Thursday
alcohol.
night. He is taking.
No, seriously, what are we
Still
doing?
have to be here. I think.
We're ready 8 to 5. We're ready then. We have to think about it. We've got a long. We have Pesachim. We have to have short daffers. We'll have
You're
time.
saying it has to be here because it's too close to Yom
Well,
Kippur.
that's JS.
We have to go
A very, very good work. A good shampoo. Covered shampoo, but I'll say another joke. This is what I got. My daughter went to some evening at the Rebbeson speaking. She said this joke. I love it, but I don't know if you'll enjoy it. Once a bear was out of a job. Bear.
Bare minimum.
He goes to the local zoo. I'm applying to be a job. So they say, we're very sorry to tell you we've got a surplus of bears, but we've got a shortage of monkeys. Perhaps you'd be agreed to be a monkey. What? Was it? I don't know. This is what the Rebbeson said. She said, my daughter repeated. So he said, okay, I can't be a monkey. I like to climb trees. He thinks there's a school down the road. Study. He goes for 3 months. He learns how to climb trees, how to peel bananas. And he becomes a monkey. And what happens is, at the end of the day, they put out food. But he's starving because he's a bear. He eats a big appetite. So he looks over to the bear's cage. And he sees that the bear's hardly eating. So he asks him, can I eat some of your food? He says, that's certainly I've got loads left over. Why don't you eat it? Well, the truth is I'm a monkey. When I came to apply for a job, there were too many monkeys, not enough bears. So I trained to become a bear, but I can't eat so much. So I've got leftovers. You help yourself. The two of them work out that one, they should swap jobs because it doesn't make sense that the bear should be a monkey, monkey should be a bear. So they go to the manager and say to the manager, do you mind? Can we swap back to he said, I'm very sorry. I employed you to be a bear, you to be a monkey. That's the job you've got. One of them says to me, you sound like a donkey, such a fool. So I tell you the truth, I am a donkey. When I applied, there was a surplus of donkeys. So they put me as a manager. The idea, the message Robinson went on was to talk about the fact that every person has to find their joy in their particular job. Because when you give everybody the wrong jobs, you end up making a mess. But anyway, never mind. It's very sweet. It's a nice joke. Okay. I'm going to point out that we've got to decide about the Siyum, and we also have to decide about Avim Pesachim. We've got certain dafim which are very short. I've looked through a lot of thesis, but it's still going to be a question of what to do. Okay. But today's daf is very long and plenty to learn. We're up to Alexander with Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Hamafish the kivul Pesach. Somebody who separates a female sheep for Korban Pesach, good or no good? No, we have to be male. Or 2 years. 2 years of here does not mean. Yeah, it has to be, even if it's a year and a day, or even 1 year, it's already no good. You actually stove. It grazes it against about mummy, mochi, we put them over the double, the shlomim, we use it as a shlomim. You makdish it as a korban.
Can you not give us a different korban?
Oh, now this is a good question, is why can't it just be automatically a shlomim? Why does it have to graze, become a Baal Mum, and then sell it and use the money for a shlomim? We've said many times, Moisa Pesach is a shlomim. So if you've got a korban which is bought incorrect, it becomes a shlomim. Why can't it be the original shlomim? The Gemara will discuss this. What? Oh, right. So Gemara says this, we'll see in a minute more. And Mafish Pesach may stop upside the Chesed B'Dalim. Somebody said on Pesach and dies, and he was the only one on the Korban Pesach. his son can't bring it as Korban Pesach. Edelishim Shlomim. Here it goes straight to be a Shlomim. We don't have to graze and all the rest. It goes to be a Shlomim. Now here's the interesting thing: is obviously if there's other people, the fact that one person dies doesn't matter. We're discussing over here that he's the only one. Which, by the way, is Machlikas Tanoim. Can you have one person to bring? This Mishnah holds that you can, and the whole problem is that the father died. Says the Gemara, we learn three things from our Mishnah. That's the first line of our Mishnah, which the Mishnah tells us that you have to let it graze and sell it and use it for Korban Shlomim. They're all to do with the concept of dichur. The concept of dichur comes up many times in Shas, which is, dichur means that if you've got something which was meant to be as a korban, but it's become no good, even if later we can find a solution how it should be good, since there was a time when it was no good, it is spoiled. Good English word would be pushed aside or disqualified. Oh, that's a good word. Disqualified. Once something is rejected, what did the article say? Rejected. But I think disqualified is slightly better word, personally. Disqualified. Once something is disqualified, it cannot become qualified again. Once you're disqualified, you cannot be qualified again. It's been like getting 6 points when you're 2 years after your license. It's quite stressful within 2 years. And what happens is, that is qualified, you have to start the whole thing. It doesn't work. From our Mishnah, we see the concept of disqualification. Why? Rejection. Because the Mishnah says you can't use it as a shlomim. You have to wait for it to get a mum, and then afterwards buy with the money a common shlomim. So it was completely disqualified. Here the Gemara says we're going to see 3 chidushim in the concept of disqualification of rejection. What are the 3 chidushim? Shmamino Balechayim Nitchis, Machlikas Tanoim in Yoma, whether a live animal can be rejected. Rabbi Shimon holds a live animal can never be rejected. And the simple logic is that he proves it, actually. The Gemara actually says, I prove it. What's one of his proofs? Got a few proofs. One of his proofs says, if you got a cow and it gets a mum over, a mum, that's a blemish which goes away. So on Sunday, it didn't have a mum, you could bring it as a korban. On Monday, it had a mum, you can't bring it as a korban. On Tuesday, it's better, you can't bring it as a korban. So you see that what? There's no such thing as disqualification. Says the Gemara, Shimon holds this qualification only occurs once an animal is dead. And then something goes wrong. But while it's still alive, there's an option to do tshuva, so to speak. Says the Gemara that a live animal, according to Shimon, does not become ever disqualified. From our Mishnah, it's proven otherwise. Because in our Mishnah, we say that it should be a shlom. It can't be a shlomim. Why can't we use it as a shlomim? Because it was made as a korban Pesach. And I think you said that it was disqualified originally because it was mukdash Hashem Pesach, and it can't be a Pesach. So it was immediately disqualified from what it was meant to be. Once it is disqualified, it's been rejected. There's another machlokas as to whether something which was always rejected, if it's rejected. There is a shit of a tanoim that only something which was first good, then rejected, and then becomes good, then it applies the rules of rejection. But something that was always rejected, and then it stops being rejected, then we do not say the rules of rejection. The reason being, because rejection means that it was a suitable as a korban, and then something went wrong, so now we say, oh, we don't want you anymore. But something that originally was no good, then we can't say such a thing. Says the Gemara from our Mishnah, which was a dichur mikor, because from the first moment, my thing is up the side. From the same moment, the first was always a female, or when you were makdish, it was already 2 years old. So it was rejected from the first second. Nevertheless, it's a dichur. Again, it's the shaila. Domim means that it's only Kedushas Domim. Over here, it's never going to be Kedushas Korban. It's only going to be Kedushas Domim because you're going to sell it and buy with it to Korban. So you might say the whole concept of Dichur doesn't occur about something which just like Kedushas Guf. Because it does have Kedushas Aguf. Kedushas Aguf, a Korban which got Kedushas Aguf, you can't sell it and eat it with Kedusha on it because what are you going to do with it? That's right. Very good. Once it gets a mum, it loses Kedushas Guf. It's only got Kedushas Domim, Kedushas value. And then you can sell it and use the money to Hashem. Okay. So that's 3 principles in Hilchas Dichur which we learn from our Mishnah. Amafish Pischa v'chul. Tonu Rabban. Amafish Pischa Yomis. Somebody separates Korban Pesach and he dies. Right? So Yaakov separates Korban Pesach and he died. If his son Reuven was going to be with him, so the son Reuven can bring it as Korban Pesach. Why? Because there were 2 people originally on. One died, so the other one can continue. If his son Reuven was not with him, only Yaakov, so what's the din? You can bring it as a Korban Shlom on the 16th. Because originally it was good as a Korban Pesach. Later it was no good as a Korban Pesach on the Korban Shalom, sorry, on the 16th. Says the Gemara, the Shisha Asa and the Chabisha Asa Loi, only on the 16th, not on the 15th. So the Dorim on the Dovers in craving beyond turf. You can't bring in the Dover, not if the Shalom, it says for you, you're not allowed to bring a Korban Tzmach. Is there? More over here is paskening, you cannot bring a voluntary gift on Yom Tov. Now, this is a Sova in the Dom is including Yom Tov. Now, this statement on the face of it is very, very straightforward. Again, let's get the statement clear because we're going to see there's a fundamental problem which is going to be a big challenge to understand. On the face of it, it's a very, very simple statement. If there was a father and a son together on the Korban, and then the father dies, so what should happen? The son should take over. The father without the son and the father dies, but now it's no good. There's nobody left on it. Says the Gemara that this statement cannot actually work. Why? Says what doesn't work. Why? The Misav Amos. When did the father die? If the father died before Chatzos, the son should, if the son was with him, that means there were only two people, the father and the son. The father died. All is left now, and it doesn't mean a Korban by himself. The reason is that he might become Tomei during the Levaya process, and then there'll be nobody left. Had the father and the son had another few people with them, it won't matter because you can bring a Korban Pesach. We discussed this in the Mishnah. You only bring a Korban Pesach if one of the people is an owner. If the only person is owning, if they're all owning, then we don't bring a Korban Pesach like that because we're scared the Korban Pesach will be brought to Psum. So over here, the question of the Gemara is that we don't understand. If the father died before Chatzos, the son will be an oinein, and it's no good. Now, a couple of questions. Question number one, maybe there's a father, son, and a few other people. So now Shiur says the Lashon is not Lashon. The Lashon of the Beis is Mashma, there's only a father and a son. Maybe the father died a week earlier. So again, you could say the Lashon is not Mashma that the father died a week earlier because it's Mashma died immediately. The Chasam Sofer says, I've got much better right. If the father died a week earlier, so already then it was no good. So the Shlomim doesn't need to be bought on the 16th of Nisan. It can be bought when? Straight away, a week before Pesach. The fact that it says, the Chasam Sofer has to ask the Kasha because he brings others to explain because the Lashon of the Beis, like Dolly said, so Chasam Sofer, I don't understand. You have to come on to the Lashon of the Beis. Without the Lashon of the Beis, which is Lashon, it's only a father and a son. Anyway, it can't be they died a week, they died then. If he died a week earlier, he should bring the Shlomim a week earlier. The fact that it says bring it on the 16th is mash, but the father literally died that time. Okay. So the father couldn't have died in the morning because then the son would be an oinen and you can't bring it as a Korban Pesach. And it's Mesacha Chatzos. So we're talking about the father died after Chatzos. Or if the son's not there, not with him, or Kavate Chatzos. Meaning like this, when the Chatzos came along, what happened was it was going to be a Korban Pesach. And now the father died. So now it has been established as a Korban Pesach, and therefore it's been rejected. Chatzos rejects it, and if Chatzos rejects it, the halacha is that you have to let it graze. We had it to Mishnah earlier. That Pesach, which is oimed by Chatzos, you didn't bring it as a Korban Pesach, is rejected. Rashi and with the Chadan asked the question: if the father dies after Chatzos, you've got another problem. The son will still be an oinen. What difference does it make? Either way, the son is an oinen. There's Rashi, interesting chat, that when a father dies after Chatzos, since the son is already mechuyev in Korban Pesach before the father died, the son will make sure not to become Tomei. And therefore there's no chashash of Shechta Korban Pesach.
Why can't you say that generally?
No.
There's a Pesach.
I find the logic hard, but Rashi says that when the father dies before Chatzos, the son is very preoccupied about the Kvor before the mitzvah Korban Pesach, so he might get Tomei. But when somebody, first the Chiyuv Korban Pesach comes on him, and then the Chiyuv, then he's more careful. When the Chanan says a much more interesting shot, I'd say, and he says that if it's after Chatzos, then it's Yom Tov. We once mentioned that Erev Pesach is a Yom Tov because you bring Korban Pesach. And he says there's no din avedus on Yom Tov. So if the father dies after Chatzos, he isn't an oinen. No oinus. So the Gemara is like this. Let's go back to the question. The Gemara is going to give 5 answers, and if you don't have the question clear, it's very difficult to understand with 5 answers. The question is: we said if there's a father and a son, and the father dies, the son carries on. If there's a father and no son, the father dies. What happens? Shlomim. Very good. Shlomim are directly as a shlomim. Says the Gemara, we don't decide. If the father died earlier, the son's an oinen, you can't bring it. If the father died later, then it's nidcha by chatzos. 5 tusim. Omar Rabba. Lo yom debis koydem chatzos. He died before chatzos. Oh, he's an oinen. Umay yevien l'shum Pesach sheni. He can't bring it to come Pesach rishon because that case is an oinen. But he'll bring it for Pesach sheni. Abai Omar Litztodin Ketani. The Beis is about two completely different scenarios. The first scenario is Meis Acha Chatzos, we died after Chatzos, where there's a father and a son. Even in Shum Pesach, because there's a son still left, and he's not an oinen, as we said, either because the father died after Chatzos, and in Meida he's not an oinen because he's ready a Yom Tov, because we careful not to become Tommy. Meis Koydem Chatzos, if he died before Chatzos, if the son's not with him, because then it was never made as a common Pesach. Why? Because by Chatzos the father was already dead. And there was only one person on it. So by Chatzos already, it became royu for Shlomim, and therefore it doesn't need to graze. Rashi is very bothered with a fundamental question over here. It's a complicated question, but Rashi already points it out. The Beis distinguishes between two examples, one where the father and the son are together, and one where the father is by himself. And the Beis tells us two different halachas. It says Rabbi that one of the cases is talking about where the father died before Chatzos, and one of the cases where he died after Chatzos. The obvious question is, why does the Beis do that? Why does the Beis talk about father and son where he only died before Chatzos, where he died, where the father and the son were talking about after Chatzos, and when the father without the son is we died before Chatzos? Why not talk about both? Whenever you distinguish something, you say that is this halacha for that case, that halacha case. Usually you talk about the same scenario. And then the only difference is, was the son with him or the son not with him? But here what you're doing is, you're changing two different factors at the same time, which is very unusual. So that they say, no, not necessarily. I saw somebody say why you can work it out. Say Pashto Cheshbon. If we're talking about, he died before Chatzos, so now the son is an oider, let's say, so he's not going to bring it to Shlomim that day. So how can something he's busy with Aninos? The father died. Okay. So Rashi answers because according to Abaya, the other two cases were so obvious to the Beis, and the Beis didn't want to talk about it. Meaning, when the father died before Chatzos with a son, it's obvious as an oinen. And that says Rashi, since it's a Mefulsha Mishnah, when you have an oinen by himself, we don't have to come and Pesach for him, the Beis didn't want to talk about it. In the second case, where he died before Chatzos and the father by himself, he knew it was obvious with the father and the son together. So that the case where it was after Chatzos, so it was after Chatzos, and the son by himself, then it would be obvious because that's another Mishnah that something's being rejected, which was originally made for Korban Pesach, and then afterwards the father died and he was the only one on it. So therefore there's nobody left. Nobody else left. Of course, it's rejected, therefore the Beis didn't talk about it. That means basically the other two cases it's a clear Mishnah, therefore the Beis didn't bother to talk about it. The concept, the halacha is that with Goyis and Misa, most people will Goyis. What's a good word for English in Goyis? Somebody about to die. I wonder if it's a good English word for it. So therefore, somebody who's a Goyis, therefore the Korban did not become established as a Korban Pesach. We're talking about like this. At Chatzos, there was only one person on it. Throes of death. There was only one person on it, the father. And the father was a Goyis. If the father was a Goyis at Chatzos, since Roiv Goyis in the Misa, the Korban never can be established as a Korban Pesach. So when later the father died, it didn't become possible because it wasn't established as a Korban and then Dochui. Because it never originally became a Korban Pesach because the Korban, so to speak, doesn't become Kodesh Korban Pesach when the father is about to die. Rav Ashi Omar, we're talking about after Chatzos of Shimon. We mentioned before, Shimon holds that Baal Chaim never gets pushed away. So therefore, we talk about we died after Chatzos. And that Chatzos was established as Korban Pesach, and yet you can bring as a Shlom because he doesn't hold on the whole idea of disqualification or rejection. We're talking about where the father established himself, only chose the Korban Pesach after Chatzos, and after he chooses Korban Pesach, he dies. Korban Pesach, because that's when Kaisel have to designate Korban Pesach. We have 5 answers why this Korban is not either disqualified as an oinen. Either according to Rava, we're talking about bringing it as a Pesach Sheni, and therefore that is a Pesach Rishon. According to Abaya, we're talking about 2 completely separate cases, one before Chatzos, one after Chatzos. According to We have Shravia, we're talking about as a Geisa, so it's never established as a Korban Pesach, and therefore there's no problem with Tichut. Rav Ashi says it's just a Shimon who doesn't hold to the concept of Tichut. And finally, Ravina says we're talking about we only chose it after Chatzos, and therefore there is no problem with Tichut. Says the Mishnah, HaPesach sh'nis'ar b'zvachim. A Korban Pesach that got mixed up with other Kabbanis which you do different avodas. For example, an Osham and Oila. What's the main difference between the Osham and the Oila to a Korban Pesach? It's interesting. I would have thought actually the main problem is the Zrikas Adam, is how you sprinkle the blood. Because what happens is like this. All the Kabbanos that are designated. I mean, let's say, for example, Rashi says you've got Oila, a Asham, and a Korban Pesach. 3 separate Kabbanos. And you've got 3 sheep, and you mix them all up. Now what should you do? You let them all graze, and then you sell them all. That means like one sheep is worth £100, one's worth £90, and one's worth £80. And you mix them all up. So you sell them all after they get a mum, and you'll have, how much money will you have? 190 and 80 is 270. But the problem is you don't remember which one was chosen for Korban Pesach, which one was for Oila, which one was for Nosham. And the halacha is you can't diminish the money. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to pay £100 for every one of those 3 Kabbanos. And you will lose the £30 from your pocket. In fact, you'll actually lose more because it's all unlikely that once it gets a mum, it's worth less. So originally it was worth 100. Once it's got a mum, they've all gone down £20. Now you've only got 80, 70, and 60. And you have to pay 100 for each one because you have to make sure that the Korban doesn't lose out. So therefore you give each one. So what you do is you let them graze, they become about mum, then you can sell them, and the money you buy Korbanos to the full value of the most expensive Korban for all 3. Says the Gemara, this Mishnah, this B'choiva is coming up with a B'choiv, which has exactly the same kind of sprinkling of the blood, but as you put out, there's a difference who eats it. A B'choiv is eaten by Koyanim, a Korban Pesach is eaten by Yisroel. Get a group of Koyanim together if they're and they can eat it, because if it's a B'choiv, they're meant to eat it. If it's called Pesach, they're meant to eat it. So they haven't lost anything. Top of Tzaddik Chesed with Beis. One thing interesting about Tzaddik Chesed with Beis is both sides is Rashi. Very, very lot of Rashi, quite a lot of Cheshbonos. There's a tiny, tiny taste. How can you have a group of Kohanim who got mixed up between the B'choy and the Pesach? Eaters called Pesach, it will end up becoming possible. Why will it end up becoming possible? You've got 2 korbanos. One's a sheep which is called Pesach, and one which is a sheep which is a B'choy. And you don't know which one's which. So you bring them both as Korban Pesach. You'll make them possible. Why make them possible? How long are you allowed to eat a B'choy for? 2 days and 1 night. How long are you allowed to eat Korban Pesach for? So Chatzos, till their morning's Machlegas. But what will happen is, they're all like, well, now you've got to eat 2, because at the end of the day, and you've got a very limited amount of time, so you ended up going to destroy it. Shimon holds you allowed to. The Rishonim explain, of course we don't want to pass on korbanos. But in such a situation where the alternative is waiting for them to get mumim and then do something about it, we prefer to just let them be brought to Beis Absor. Better to bring a korban the best we can, even if it's going to be noisa, might left over, might get burned, than to do the other option. That's nan. You eat it like the most chamor amongst them. Says, well, so what should we do according to the Chachamim that they say we don't bring kosher Beis Absor? Wait for them to get a mum. Bring a fat animal for the value. Rashi explains that this is inherent in the Gemara is like this. There's a slightly worse problem by B'choy than any other korban. Why? All korbanos, if they get a mum, what you do is you sell it, and use the money, and you can buy a korban. B'choy, even if it gets a mum, you're not allowed to be part of it. Rather, what happens to B'choy by a mum? They kind of eat it with its mum with certain kedushas. There are 3 main kedushas, and that is that you can't make them work, you can't sell them in the marketplace, you have to sell them privately, and you can't weigh them in the marketplace. That means you don't. That means they're allowed to eat it. If the Choy Baal Mum is allowed to eat it, and they're allowed to be sold to even to Yisroel, because Yisroel is allowed to eat it as well. But they're not allowed to be sold in the Chulindika way. So again, so those Kabbalahs, let's say Korban Pesach mixed up with the Shlomim, you wait them for both to graze, get a mum, and then use the money to buy 2 Kabbalahs, one of Pesach, one of Shlomim. But over here, what's going to happen is it's going to be much worse, because over here, even after it gets a mum, it's still got Kedusha. So what you do is you wait them for both to graze, you use the money to buy a good Korban Pesach, and the 2 Korbanos, which are now grazed and both got mum, you treat them as if they're both B'chor Baal Mum, and you eat it with Kedushas B'chor Baal Mum, which means that you don't sell it to the marketplace, etc., and you don't make it work, but use the Kedushas B'chor Baal Mum. So when you sell it, you're going to have to be careful how you sell it, even after it's got a mum. It's not like a normal Korban. Once it gets a mum, you're free to do with it whatever you want. This has got Kedusha still, you've got to use it as a B'chor Baal Mum. I've got a Mishnah, very, very long, Mishnah all the way to the bottom of the picture. Yeah, that's long ones. Quite a few. Chabush of the Pesach. A group lost the Korban Pesach. They said to one of them, go and look for it. We'll say a tiny bit of that introduction. Basically, this whole Mishnah, the first half of the Mishnah, discusses the cases where we've given instructions to somebody to follow through. The problem is, once you've given instructions, those instructions hold force, and therefore, if you then want to change your mind, it's not so straightforward. So over here, we're talking about a group of people. Let's say all of us together bought Korban Pesach to share, and then we've lost it. We've lost the Korban Pesach. Lost it. What happened is we ask Yehuda, do you mind going out, finding out? Let's ask him, got a lot of connections. Can you go and find the Korban Pesach for us? And you go and you find it. The shochat and you shachted it. But meanwhile, we are nervous. We're not sure you're going to find it. So we, at the same time, all the rest of us, except for you, went to shachtu, and we shecht our own. So now there's 2 Kabbalas Pesach. If you're the shechted first, since we asked him and we told him he should be our shliach, that Korban Pesach is kosher and ours is possible. If we shechted first, so ours is more important, because at the end of the day we shechted it. That shows we're not interested at all in his. He eats from his. He can eat from his, because at the end of the day, by him shechting, he's showing that he's not interested in ours at all. But we shecht eat from ours. We don't know if they both shecht at the same time. We don't know which one was shechted first. And the Meiri says, when 2 people shecht at the same time, we know for a fact that one of them was shechted first, because it's impossible to ever have a situation when 2 things happen exactly simultaneously. So what? Oh, well, that's right. He eats from his. They don't eat with him. Theirs gets burnt and they don't bring Pesach Sheni. Let's get this halacha very clear, because we're going to have a few scenarios of it. Again, we all had the Korban Pesach together. We lost it. So we asked somebody, would you please go and look for it? He goes to look for it. If he shechted, we're all Yotza, because we asked him, so we're all on his group. If we shechted, and his was shechted later, so what happens is, we are Yotza with our Korban Pesach, because we shechted. By shechting, we're saying that no longer do we want his to be ours, and therefore we're Yotza with that one, and he shechted later, will be Yotza with his. The problem will be when we have no idea who shechted first. So now, his for him is definitely kosher. Yehuda's for his is definitely kosher. Why? Whether he shechted first or second, he's allowed to eat from it. But ours, it depends. If we shechted ours first, so we can eat its Korban Pesach. But if we shechted it second, since we asked him, had we not asked him, it would be a different story. But we asked him to shecht for us. So once he shechted for us, we're all on his group. Once we're all on his group, well, we can't change groups. So our Pesach is completely possible. Yes, but by him going away from the group to look for it, he's saying, that's it, I'm not interested. Even if we shecht, that's right. Even if we shecht it first, he's got a way to look, so therefore he's part. Now what happens, exactly the same story, but instead he's going looking, but what happens is, he tells us to shecht for him. If I get delayed, let's say to get lost. Let's say a person, for example, or he did get lost, he's worried that he might not get there in time. So he says, if I get there late, go and shecht for me. And he goes and finds it and he does shecht it. Now here, he asked us, we never asked him. So it's exactly the opposite. Why? Because he is mevutal to us. So if we shecht first, ours is good. And if we shecht second, we also ours is good. His is only good if he shechted first. If he shechted second, his is no good. The Mishnah says very simple. If there's a shechted first, since he said, if I'm coming late, shecht on me, so he's with it. They eat from theirs, he doesn't eat with them, and his goes to be burned. The bottle is Pesach Sheni, it's bottle Pesach Sheni. So therefore, exactly the same halachas where he asked us to shecht for him, not we asked him. So therefore, if we shechted first, marvelous. If we shechted second, we can shecht for ourselves, and his yotz with his was shechted first. If we don't know, he will not be able to eat any. He's part of Pesach Sheni because one of the kabbalas was right, we just don't know which, and therefore we are left with the situation of the korban, ours will be eaten and his will be burnt. He can't eat it, yeah, because we don't know if he asked us to shecht for him, and we don't know if he shechted first or we shechted first. If we shechted first, it's part of our group. If he shechted first, it's part of his group.
The question is, how could he doesn't have?
He's not allowed to. He's not allowed to. Oh, he's not allowed to. That's it. He's not allowed to. That's it. Now, what happens is, what happens if you asked us? Yehuda asks us to shecht for him, and we ask him to shecht for us? Then it's a real problem. We all eat from the first one which is shechted. If we both, let's say for example, we all ask you to shecht for us, and he asks shecht for me if you find it, and he says if I come late, shecht for me. So then what happens is if you don't know, nobody can eat anything. Since we clearly asked, please shecht for me, so whichever one was shechted first, that's the one which is good. And we said, you shecht first. If we don't know which, nobody can eat from anything. The simple is very straightforward. Once you've asked somebody to shecht for you, and the person shechted for you, and we don't know if he shechted first or second, we don't know which korban is correct, you can't eat any. What happens? If he goes off himself, and neither of us ask each other to be a messenger, we're not achroi for each other, and we can each do what we want, and therefore it's all marvelous. He shechts for himself, it's fine. We shecht for ourselves, it's fine, and we have no problems because at the end of the day, nobody has to be a shliach. Let's get it like this. We've got two groups of people, Group A and Group B. Each one set aside a korban. Let's say each one had 10 people inside. And now the korban is mixed up. Korban of A mixed up korban of B. We don't know which one's which. Now, let's see if anybody can work this out. What? Before shchita. So why can't you just do a simple thing? Each one take a korban and say, make it that. Either this one was mine originally, right? He has two korbanos. This is group. This is another korban. If this was my group originally, marvelous. If it isn't, you should all agree they should become my group. Does anybody know why it doesn't work? So more than that. And therefore, we can't transfer the entire group onto another Korban Pesach. We said tells us that there has to be at least one person from the original group left. So therefore, let's say this group from this side of the room has this one, and this group from this side of the room has this one. And now we've mixed up the two sheep, don't know which one is which. If they all say like this, if this is ours, what do you do? No, so take one person from each group and move across. I think about it like this, we shall talk about it. It's a fascinating case. It was spent by with us. How we go? You've got 5 groups called Pesach, and there's 5 people in every group, and each one mixes up the Korban Pesach between them all. So each one of the groups has to take 5 individuals from every one of the 5 groups. So you take, let's say, group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5. So group 1 will now be 1 out of every 5. Group 2 will be 1 out of every 5. Group 3 will be 1 out of every 5. And then we will all say the following statements. If group 1 will start off and say as follows: if this was our Korban Pesach originally, this is the best. If it was from group 2, that person should be on it, and we're asking him, please, can we join yours? If it's from group 3, we're asking, can we join you from group 3? And that way, every Korban Pesach has one of the original groups, so we haven't taken everybody away. And therefore it all works. Mishnah describes it to great length. Oh, very good. They won't discuss that. Very good. If there's 5 groups, only 4 people, it will not work. Shtei chaburs, 2 groups.
You can add another person.
Oh, can you? The Gemara described this. The Gemara discussed it. Shtei chaburs shnisavu Pesachim. 2 groups that mixed up to come Pesach. So now here, what happened was you could add Elu Moshchen Le'nechot. They draw 1 person. A second, let me just think a second. No. We take 1 from the other side. Elu Moshchen Le'nechot me'elu. Elu Moshchen Le'nechot me'elu. Polo yetzel elu. No, again. Elu Moshchen Le'nechot. Echot me'elu polo yetzel elu. V'echot me'elu polo yetzel elu. We swap 1 group for another, 1 group for another. If it was always ours, this one, so you who left your group will now leave yours, join us. If this was always yours, and we've actually taken the wrong one, you will give up on ours. Please can we join your common Pesach, because you come for the right. Take 1 out of every group, and they say the same thing. 2 people who decided to eat an entire Korban Pesach by themselves. Now you can't take 1 from the group because there's nobody else to take from the group. So here you have 2 people, and each one was planning to do an entire Korban by himself. Each one adds 1 more person to his group. So at least there should be 2 in the group. You have to, you've got a choice. And then what happens is you then swap the person that you added to the other group. I mean, you say to somebody, do you want to join my Korban Pesach? He says yes. Now fine, I'm happy you want to join me. Please really give it to the next person and join him. Give up on yours and you'll come to me. And you've joined on to mine. Let's just do a bit more. If they all ask each other, you eat from the first. If nobody said anything, so whoever shechted first is good. You can't From here the Chachamim said, it's good to keep quiet for the wise, even more for the fools. A fool who keeps quiet, people think of him as wise. We're going to stop here because I'd like to assume tomorrow and anyway thing. I just want to say a couple of points about this point. But Bitterman in this week speaks a lot about the concept of quiet, being quiet. It's a very, very important word. Over here says that keeping quiet is worth even for the wise. As the teacher always used to say to us, even a fish won't get caught if it would keep its mouth shut. So we'd always tell us to keep quiet. And he says in this week's parsha, it says Pamud Zavimon, and it should say, it says Pamud Besoich HaRimonim. Why does it say the bells should be within the Rimonim? It's the other way around as well. The Rimonim should be within the bells. The answer is only while the palmoim, which makes a noise, is inside the pomegranates, which don't make noise. When a person has speech, amongst times when he keeps quiet, then the speech is valuable. But if his speech is constantly and it's not surrounded by silence, then the speech is useless. He brought a few eyes to this idea. I remember Chilakman used to say that if a person's got a mouth who doesn't know how to close it, then it's not a mouth, it's just a hole which things fall out of. If it's only something which thing. Anyway, wish you a very lot of tzlach. I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for the beautiful shlachmanos. I very much appreciated it. And everybody should be zecher. All the tefillahs that we had to put in all the avoid and it's mei geula, it's man simcha. Wish to see us weiter tzlach and all our learning. Okay, so we're up to here. So, right, so it's about.
What about your punch?
We've got biscuits as well in the kitchen.
Anybody who's got a good idea what we should do for the Sims, so it's got positive, proper suggestions. Stand questions. What was